Good afternoon, everybody. Today, two authors were sick, for which physically they could not make it to this program. So, I have been given instruction to be in their place. We have amazing translators here, even if the number is 3, it is no less. Rabindra K Swain, he is an acclaimed poet in Odisha, and he has been published almost all the great magazines and periodicals in the world, including the Times, Little Times, TLS, Times Literary Supplement, if I am correct. Ravi Babu has also translated many good short story writers, poets, and Shachi Rautara's Mashani Rafula, Ravi Patnaik, Rajendra Kishore Panda. Besides this, recently he has one magnum opus, almost more than 350 authors, poets in Odia. He has translated and anthologized them in one magazine, one book, anthology. And it is the first of its kind in Odisha, such a major work. Here is Snehaprava Das, madam. We know each other. I am her publisher. And she is a finest, not only a poet of her own, she is one of the finest translators in India. Her book has been published no less than by Speaking Tiger, if I am not wrong. Manoj Panda's book has been translated, and from Odia to English. And Oxford and many front line publishers. Mnisha Choudhry, she is a very big name in the world of translation in India. She is with Madam Mission of Zubaan, India, and connected with Madam Urvashi Butalia. Anybody, she is a synonym for feminism writings, for Kali for woman, if I correctly remember. We used to read at least 30 years before. Now they have named it Zubaan, and one of the best feminist publishing house in Asia, if not in the world. Manisha ji has so many good translations work. She is one of the finest editors of the country also. So we are very grateful and very delighted to have this such a illustrious panel. Our topic is today is historicizing the translation. It will be, why such a name? We all, those who are students of literature, be it English or in any language, we read their history of literature, history of Odia literature, English literature. But you might have not heard the history of a translation also should have been done, because without the translators, no literature can go beyond their own language. They have no leg to go to walk beyond their own language. The crucial role played by the translators make them able to go beyond that border. Unfortunately, in Odia or in English, we do not have a much book or no book at all, I should say, on the history of a translation. In this connection, I would like to ask Mnisha ji that she should throw some light on this perspective, that why nobody writes about the history of translation in India.
Since Manu ji has already outlined that I dabble in many things, translation is one of them, and otherwise I have a background in publishing. I think if we trace the roots of a lack of historicization of translation, we can probably look at the history of how publishing has looked at translation itself. And because most of us who initially came to translation, we came to it as a labor of love. We came simply because we are fortunate to belong to this country, which is home to so many languages, that a lot of us are automatic translators. Even when we were not writing translations down on a piece of paper, we were automatically translating from one language to another as we moved between our private and public worlds. And being usually bilingual or trilingual in our country is not unusual. I mean, it's like most of us. I was listening to the Bhima Bhoi session before this, and I was very proud to say that I followed 85% of it because of so many of the Sanskrit root words that were being used. I could get a general drift of the whatever was being spoken about. So I think till there is professionalization of any area, nobody bothers to record the history. It remains a sort of cottage industry, if you like, where we all came to translation simply because I was able to think in two languages. I was concerned about literary value in two languages. I was concerned about communicating the beauty of literature from one language to another. And I was experimenting as a translator that, can I do it? Let me try. And what will happen? At the most, I'll fail. There's nothing, I didn't come into it with a great sense of that my life depends on this or there is so much at stake. It was more a labor of, it's a good thing to do, it's a worthy thing to do, it should be done. And it is only recently in the past 10 years or so that translation as a discipline has received serious academic attention in our country. So it is only now that we are going to bother with the labor of actually collecting all the data and facts, as well as the reasons why people translate. People learned translation to become interpreters, and that was mostly with Western languages. For our own languages and English, the equation between the two has always been a very vexed one, in the sense that every Indian language writer wishes to be published in English, and yet we all have a sense of resentment that why is it that we only receive attention once we are published in English. Since I translate from the Hindi to the English and vice versa, I can speak with some certainty about even the best of Hindi writers really want to be translated into English. Why? Because Hindi is very widely spoken. It's a major language of the country. There is a lot of politics and money behind Hindi. Even then, I think the respectability that comes with being translated into English is something that even Hindi writers crave. Now, these are all issues which, when we talk about translation, we can open these issues up and talk further about them. But I think that we will historicize translation only when we recognize it as a very legitimate, very respectable, very creative literary activity. That's what I'd like to begin my remarks with.
Well, thank you, Mnisha ji. Now I would like to have one question for Mr. Rabindra K Swain. Ravi Babu, you are a very good poet. I know from the very beginning, since the last 30 years we are friends. And you are also a good translator. What is your experience of translating Sachirautra, Ravi, Patnaik? They are all fiction writer. You have translated the fiction of Ravi Patnaik as well as Sachirautra. Also poetry of Mr. Rajendra Kishore Panda and others also. What are the challenges you face being a poet on publishing, translating the prose writers.
Very good evening, good afternoon, I mean, and thank you, Manu. So, specific problems, if you want to hint at, I don't have any specific answer also, because you take up an author you like, and you take up a work of art, I mean a poem or a story, because you wish you could have written that piece. Your failure to produce that kind of writing prompts you to translate those works. And the authors you have mentioned, like Satya Rautrai or Rajendra Pandey or Saurindra Barik, so those are quite kind of authors, very varied from each other. They are distinct. That throws challenge on you. If you could think it's quite easy to translate Saurindra Barik, because he's said to be a simple poet, writes simple poems. Rajendra Pandey writes the most difficult kind of poems, even in vocabulary and in the true sense of poetry. He has complex issues. Sometimes I miss the vein. So these are the challenges you have to face, and when the poet is available, it is still better. It is different thing to do classics. Classics need to be done and redone, that's understood, and they stand comparison and study also. Where comes your point, focus on historicizing, because that kind of work has not yet been done. And in Odisha, translation is such a very thin stream, it could be counted in fingers who are the translators. So we don't have much precursors. The present translators who have done great work, like K.K. Mahapatra, Jatin Naik, Himanshu Mahapatra, Madam is here. They are the translators of prose. Bikram Das is the great pioneer. But coming to poetry, Jayant Mahapatra is my ideal poet and translator. So when someone like Jayant Mahapatra is available, I talk to him over a choice of word, making up a sentence. So these processes should be documented, or we should put it on record for posterity. This is not being done, so I never thought what could be historicizing translation. Now that you speak of it, even in India, all the great poets in English, beginning from A.K. Ramanujan to A.K. Mehrotra, they have shown us what a classic Indian classic could be in English. And they have even theorized from Ramanujan, interior landscape, that inner world and outer world, and again A.K. Mehrotra, he is redoing Kabir in such a drastic manner, it makes you wonder how could he take such a liberty. So because they are in a position to do it, one thing. Second thing, there is a publishing house who has a strong editor. They could have a discourse. Even they can throw question to the translator, who is a practicing poet also. But in Odisha, I feel I lack that opportunity, that privilege. There is no one to talk to, nobody will listen to, and the poets are very difficult to handle with. So even if you speak to Rajendra Pandey, he will say, no, my words are not like that. I didn't mean this. So those are the problems I am facing. But still then that the work is being done, that itself is a great thing. And there are places like Madam has the opportunity of getting a speaking tiger over OEP. So we should have a publishing house which you have started. This work needs to be strengthened. And you hire a very austere editor, those who could throw water on us. No, what you are doing is not well. So we can collaborate. A collaboration is not also going on. Everyone is sticking to his gun. Everyone is a good translator, that's okay, but we don't have a translators guild also. So those issues are to be addressed to historicize translation, and you please also take steps because we will not come together, none of us. All of us refuse to be bound by any discipline, any work even. So publisher has a great role in doing this. Suppose this anthology going on, Odia poetry in English translation, there are 345 poets, those who wrote or are writing in 20th century. And we have great translators, beginning from Jayant Mahapatra, Ramakanta, Sitakanta, Rajendra, Saubhagya, all of have done their work there. And when touching those translations, Rajendra Pandit, chief editor, he would say, no, you cannot touch the great translators. And the translators themselves are not available to discuss if we could make any suggestion, because no one is a holy cow, no one is perfectly right. I don't have much command, let me admit. But given the limitation, one can sit together to sort out all these problems. Thank you, Manu.
Snehaprava madam, now it is your turn. You have been a good translator for a few decades. And okay, let me complete. Okay, 1 decade or so. But I came to know your real work of Mr. Manoj Kumar Panda, which you had published for a Speaking Tiger. And it was one of the wonderful and brilliant translations, for which when I did one book and taken Manoj Panda's short story during the pandemic time, and I wanted it to be published in English by some important platform that is called our Scroll-in. They asked me who is the translator, and while talking, they suggested your name. It speaks that they have liked your translation of Manoj Kumar Panda earlier also, and that is a very, we are delighted with this development. One thing I just wanted to know, Manoj's Odia writings were very upbeat, and what made you to think to write, to translate Manoj Panda's short stories, who is a very difficult poet, story writer? Could you just give your experience and thought about it?
Thank you, Manu sir. And I must at the outset thank you for inviting me to be a part of this event. Since it was, the topic was historicizing translation, let me first narrow down this line of discussion to how translation came into being in Odisha. I'll come to Manoj Panda after that. Because you see that in the very beginning, when Saradas wrote Mahabharata in Odia, why did he do that? He did that because during that period, this Sanskrit language was it was creating a power hierarchy. Means it was a language of authority, and that was why. And Odia language was regarded as a pariah or a kind of lowly language. So he wanted to bring it down to the mass by using colloquial words. And from Saradas to Bhanjar Yuga and even in the colonial age, translation was, when we said translation, it was understood as something which is transcreated, adopted, imitated, and interpreted. It was not translation proper as it is understood today. Even in colonial age also, when Radhanath Rai translated and Madhusudan Rao translated this Nirbasita Bilapo, William Cowper's Alexander Selkirk, Solitude of Alexander Selkirk, they were all transcreating. In 20th century, during the post-colonial age, translation, it still remains more or less a transcreation. Because in 16th century, I'll tell you a very funny anecdote, not exactly anecdote, it is from Midsummer Night's Dream. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 3 and Scene 3, there is a scene where the magician Puck changes the fool of the play. You know, Shakespeare has a fool in every play, in comedy. So he puts a donkey's head in place of a human head. And when his friend sees it, Queen's was his name, he says that, my, thou art translated. So the word he uses, translated, means that you have changed. Translation meant, even in India, in Odisha, in 16th century, as well as in European countries, translation meant that there is some change. So now I will come to Manoj Panda. So when I read Manoj Panda and I was asked to do Manoj Panda stories, the first thing that came to my mind that I cannot do it. I felt very defeated. So these stories they were on the verge of, they were neither romantic nor pessimistic, but they were, you can say that some kind of a bizarre at the surface level. When you just at the first look and face, they look very bizarre, and the structure, both subject-wise and writing style-wise, the stories looked somehow different. Why somehow different? They are utterly different from the way we understand stories having a definite beginning, middle, and end. They are different because they, just like a writer says that a story can begin at any point. A story is like a train. You can hop at any point, hop into the train at any point, and you can reach the destination. So Khalid Hosseini has said that. So if we are to remember Khalid Hosseini's remarks, Manoj Panda's stories are like that. They begin at a point, but they take you to a destination. But you have to find out how it happens. So when an author writes in Odia, he thinks in Odia and he writes in Odia, in his own language. When a translator does that, it is very difficult to think like the author. Because it's like, translation is like playing a game of chess. You have to understand what move the author is planning next. And then what happens? You have to think, because you are aiming at a category of readers who are not supposed to understand the language in which the original is written. You have to think in the language in which you are going to translate it. So that was the primary difficulty when I thought of translating Manoj Panda. Because his words, they are not simple words. They convey so many meanings at a time. They are not like Bhanji and these homonyms, but his words are they were not words, they're connotations. Their words were very connotative, and you have to translate those words, always keeping in mind in which context the words are used. And Manoj Panda tries to create aesthetics out of Bijari. One of my students, while I was a visiting professor at Utkal University, she has written a dissertation, I was her supervisor, and I told her to name it as the aesthetics of Bijari, Manoj Panda's stories. She has written a dissertation paper on that. So, Manoj Panda was a very skilled writer who could create aesthetics, make bizarre things, absurd things look beautiful. So you have to find out that how you have to create another text. My aim was to write a text following, I was to transcreate, I was to interpret, and then it was to translate. So it was not Manoj Panda's story is not like you just open a thesaurus and find out the meanings and words corroborating the passage, write the corroborating passage and a sentence like that. You cannot just search for equivalent words and equivalent sentences. So you have to find out think of and the equivalent mode. So the mood and mode has to have the equivalence of translating. While these are the major two things which a translator has to take care of while doing a translation work. So while translating Manoj Panda, I must admit that it was a terrible task, difficult very much, but somehow I managed to understand the author's mindset, that how he feels while he writes and what exactly he aims at, what exactly he wants to convey. So once you understand that, it is not difficult to find out a way of interpreting it. Thank you.
Okay. Mnisha ji, you have told that you have been translating from Hindi to English and vice versa. Could you just tell us, is there any historic documents about the translators in either in Hindi or in English, if you have any idea?
I am the wrong person to ask. I have not, studied translation as a scholar. I'm a practitioner who has learned by translating, multiple things out of interest. I am a student of literature. My training was in English literature. I happen to have a strong relationship with my own mother tongue, which is Hindi. And therefore, whatever I have learned has been through an intimate relationship with the authors that I have translated. It's a very intimate reading of the language that they use. And my training in literature in English helped me somewhat, but I think that when you work as a translator, you have to somewhat liberate yourself from the shackles of academics if you are going to be somewhat playful with the language, both in the reading, that is in the target language, as well as in the source language. And unless you develop that sense of play and intimacy with the language, you're not going to be a great fiction translator, or perhaps poetry, as Mr. Swain was mentioning. I mean, it's a sort of constant, it's a work in progress till you finish. It's like you could keep going back to it and changing something else. And I think what you learn as a translator is really not so much about the transfer of language, but the transfer of spirit. Unless you capture the spirit of the author, your imagined understanding or your assumed understanding of what the author was trying to do when she was playing with language, it is only that you can hope to sort of somewhere hold on to and take to the next language, within the limits of your own capabilities, within the limits of your own understanding of vocabulary, within the limits of your understanding of the beauty of expression. I mean, that is really how I would put it. Whether there's a historical document which actually talks about how Hindi has been translated, I am sure your partners in Ashoka Center for Translation will be ferreting out that information to the benefit of all of us, but that is not something that I have been engaged with.
In Odisha, yes, we have a kind of documentation of works of translation.
Translating in Odisha?
No, yeah.
That is, I'm the publisher.
Yes, you are. So Santosh, what he did, Paul told Santosh to just record the works done till now, translated works. So it's a hefty book. So at least we know what work has been translated from which language.
That is a beautiful language, and while I was publishing that, translating Odisha of Paul St. Pierre, interestingly, I found that I have translated 8 books so far. He has not mentioned my name, but I worked because my profession was there as a publisher, so I didn't tell him anything. I just published. So what I want to say that that is also not a foolproof. They have not. I found that it is a book giving importance to few people, not giving due importance to Odia to everybody.
Sorry for interruption.
Yes.
I was referring to the work not yet published. So, Santosh, what he has done, he has documented the works done. This work, Sachi Rautre, translated by this. So, from other languages into Odia, from Odia into other languages. So, that work is to be published. That has not yet been done.
I got your point. Anyhow.
So that we know the history of translation in Odisha.
I think the reason is that I am not a person, I was not prepared for this session because two academics fall sick in the same program and sent me a message that sorry, we are one of them was aged, another is of my age. He had come from BHU University, but he could not make it. So the question what Mnisha ji told that he is not an academic scholar about translation, he is a practitioner like us, and so we missed that one. However, I do not have much thing now to proceed. I would like to leave the audience if any questions they have. Yeah, please. Yes, you should, about the translation
So
program.
since Manuji is somewhat short of words in terms of what else to ask us, I'm going to take this opportunity to just mention that at Zubaan we are running a translation grant program, and we are very keen that publishers from Indian languages look at Zubaan's titles, and if they wish to translate them in the language of their choice, in this case perhaps Odia, we are happy to give a small grant for that effort. And I really would appreciate it if there are Odia publishers who would take the benefit of this grant. I had said to Manuji that I will take 2 minutes and announce this so that more people come to know about the Zubaan Prabha Khaitan translation program. And we have already given out about 24 grants so far in various Indian languages: Hindi, Punjabi, Malayalam, Kannada, not Odia, Bangla, and I think Marathi, and also Malayalam and Tamil. So these many people are already taking the benefit of the grant. It would be a pity if this very rich publishing community in Odia would not become part of this. So I would really request you all to get in touch with me.
I shall just add one thing that for this particular program, Ashoka University Translation Center and Zubaan Books, they have been associated for this session, and unfortunately the Ashoka University Center people, they also could not come due to certain unavoidable circumstances. So, however, I am happy that Mnisha ji at last did it, and she could make, in spite of so many hurdles we passed through, and I hope good translators will take the advantage of this opportunity of Zubaan offering now. Thank you, Mnisha ji. And I also now ask dear friends in the audience if they have any questions to ask. Please.
Basically, it's not a question. I would like to react to the question already asked to the panel. This is I'm reading out my writing only. Every language has its own charm, subtle nuances of thoughts, fine distinctions, differences, variations, shades, niceties, refinements, and overtones. No two separate languages can give the reader the same amount of literary fulfillment, even though one is a translation of the other. It becomes too noticeable when the original writing is more language-centric than story-centric. While translating, a translator should not lose any attention on two separate and often opposite angles so as to affect adversely the last product, the translated work. On the one hand, the English version should be as close as possible to the original writing. At the same time, I put all my efforts to be careful that the final product doesn't turn out to be a disjointed, fragmented work. Rather, it should profoundly retain the charm of the original Odia with a seamless, smooth, and lucid transformation into English language. These are the probably those who are translating must be facing this problem. And on this, I appreciated Mnisha ji's. First thing he told that translation is a labor of love. That's only probably I feel it's how translators work out.
But that is not excuse for bad work. Just because it's a labor of love, I must clarify. And I want to point out that why must we always speak about translation in the context of translating into English? I mean, why don't we talk about intra-language translations, say from Odia to Marathi or from Gujarati to Tamil and so on? I think that's a very important conversation waiting to happen.
Right. Okay.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody there? Okay. Now, I once again thank Mnisha ji coming from Delhi to here to speak to us and enlighten us. And thank you, Snehaprava madam, for being with us. Ravi Babu is a good friend and he has accepted my request and come here and given us opportunity to for this beautiful discussion. Thank you everybody and thank you the audience.
And the sponsors who organized is mainly by the Holy Review Trust, as we know, and of course an associate sponsor, Indian Oil, and on the same time supported by SAIL and NALCO, Union Bank of India, and OHPC. So thank you once again to all the sponsors for making it more clear reasons about